Hello, everybody, and welcome to the fourth, I can't believe it's the fourth already, of our When HR Meets GDPR session. Now, last time after the session, we decided to let you, our audience, to select the topic. And so we ran a little poll on LinkedIn, and the employee performance came up full at the top, followed by business continuity. So today we're obviously going to be covering employee performance, and next month we're going to tackle business continuity. But we wanted to say thank you for taking part in the poll and also for your comments and questions during and after each of the events. As you know, both Julie and I strongly believe in generating awareness and educating businesses in both HR and GDPR, which, due to their nature, they collide at every turn. And so your comments and questions are extremely welcome, and they help us to identify topics to bring to the table. Also, please let us know if there is anything in particular that you would like us to cover. We do value your input. So with any further delay, let's get into today's session, which is about employee performance and the personal data that is collected and used as part of these activities. For the benefit of those that have joined us for the first time, Julie, would you like to do a quick introduction on yourself?
Yeah, of course, thank you. And just to echo the thanks in terms of the feedback and the poll results, it's always brilliant to get that interaction from everyone. So I'm Julie, and I'm the founder of Puri Solutions, which is a HR consultancy and coaching service. I'm a chartered fellow of the CIPD and also a fellow of the Institute of CPD. As well as being an accredited coach. So knowledge and education is incredibly important to me. Now, I work with small and medium-sized businesses, and the aim is really to empower them through people solutions, whatever that looks like. Whether it be outsourcing their entire HR service, or whether it's going in and doing strategic work or project work, including supporting internal HR teams. As a leadership and confident coach, I also work with individuals to empower them to be what it is that they want to be, whether that's increasing their confidence during leadership or actually finding those leadership skills. Christina, did you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, all right. So I'm Christina from CVG Solutions, and I'm a multi-award winning GDPR or data protection, whatever you prefer, professional. I primarily work with small and medium-sized businesses, including charities, and I really like to see them thrive. So that's why I tend to gravitate towards them. I have a hands-on and practical approach with my clients that is proportionate to their size and complexity. I help my clients to navigate the intricacy of GDPR, and I do that by educating them on the subject, which empowers them to make informative decisions, as knowledge is power. I truly believe that, which in turn that enables them to operate with a high-performing culture, which fuels their business growth. So for me, it's all about educating, empowering, and enabling.
Definitely. Such an important thing. And before we begin, please be aware that we are going to be recording the session. And it's really so that we can use it for marketing our products and services on social media and on our websites, and also promoting these events.
Absolutely. So I always like to start from the beginning of anything, think of it as a story. So my question to you, Julie, thinking that we're talking about employee performance, how is a performance review defined?
So the idea behind performance reviews is really a way of capturing and measuring information about employees and therefore about the organisation. The idea is that you've got the company vision, you've got the objectives, you've got team and department objectives, if your hierarchy is that way, and then you have individual objectives, but it should all feed in, the individual should feed in through the company, because that makes complete sense. But it's always interesting to how often that happens or doesn't happen, because there's not necessarily that two-way communication. Of course, any objectives, the visions of the organisation really should fall in line with the company values, what their expectations are, what behaviours they expect. Again, because all of this is so important. If you think of the building blocks of any organisation, it's going to be on the values, their expectations, the behaviours, and then you think about the company, what it's actually aiming to do. In order to do this, we've got to have alignment. Now, when I talk about alignment, because I talk about alignment and engagement with individuals, and just to give you a bit of background, alignment is understanding why you do something that you're doing. It's not just doing it for a reward. There's a fantastic book by a chap called Cohn, and he talks about how people are similar to dogs, cats and pigeons. And of course I would have read this book, for those that know me. And it's really, really interesting, because actually if you give people a reward, you can train their behaviour, similar to a dog, similar to a pigeon. The whole point of driving engagement is not so that you're just giving them a reward to do the behaviour. It's so that they understand they're aligned to the company. Therefore, the behaviour becomes a natural thing. You don't necessarily have to have that reward. The value of having that alignment piece within organisations, within teams, is it's really putting everything together. It's putting those foundations and making them really, really solid. Now, performance reviews sit within that. They're a really good way of assuring the employee and the manager that they're doing a good job, or how their performance is going. Of course, not everyone may be a top performer, but it helps drive that conversation. It allows recognition for individuals. But also, if you take the data even further into the organisation, it allows the organisation to understand what's going on in terms of the team, in terms of the manager, in terms of the individual. So performance reviews can also be used not just as a tick box exercise, which happens an awful lot within businesses, but also they can be used for pay reviews, for promotions, whether you're looking at your succession planning and you're planning your bench. For restructures, they can actually be used as part of the matrix. So they are an incredibly valuable document if, and this is a big if, they're done correctly.
Yes.
And it's really dependent then on what your business has in place. So so that there's a lot behind performance reviews rather than just that tick box. It's a yearly process. I've got to get it done.
Yeah, I think, from a business perspective, they bring a lot of value. Like you say, they should be used properly rather than a tick box exercise. And with that in mind, is there a particular time or good time or bad time, I suppose, that they should be completed? Is there a specific frequency that we should be aware of?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And I think I'd respond with, if I always asked you how you were and didn't do anything with it, it would get really, really annoying, right? So if every month I was saying you need to complete a performance review, but maybe we're not going to do anything with it, or I'm not going to have a chance to do anything with it because next month I'm going to ask you exactly the same questions, they're not worthwhile. There's no measurement involved. Now, it's really dependent on the style of business that you're working in. but I would definitely recommend they happen on a yearly basis. But they've got to be live documents. They've got to be a live process to enable that alignment and engagement and true meaning of the values, the expectations of the business, the goals of the business. That's got to be discussed on a frequent basis. So maybe the quarterly reviews, bring it into those one-to-ones as well. There's no point, I truly believe there's absolutely no point in having tick box exercise. It's a waste of everyone's time. You've got to have a process in place that's really going to benefit the business.
And the individual, I think, because when I was, employed, we used to do them every 6 months, like a mid-year review. And I found the media quite useful for me because it would tell me that whether I'm going on the right track, if some objectives needed to be readjusted because things have changed. So I found that was quite informative for me as an individual, as an employee, which I would then take forward to my team. So it actually has a whole support all the way around. And we always tend to think about performance review as the individual and their manager as being involved in that process. Should there be other people involved or other roles involved in that process?
I think it's dependent on the word or the definition of being involved. I think during the conversation, it's a good thing that it's between the manager and the individual. But I don't think that's where it should stop. I think there should be a review of the manager's manager, so a grandparent within the business, to understand what's going on and actually take that into account when they're talking to their manager. It could be that, and again, a really important area for HR is to look through the performance reviews, not only to analyse the data, but also to see if something's going on. If someone's saying that they're really unhappy in work, they're not meeting their performance reviews, they're not meeting their objectives, they've got too much work, they're feeling pressured. It's such a lifeline where a business can go in and go, what's going on? How can we help you perform? Because I'd like to think a lot of businesses, the majority of businesses, want their staff teams to perform and their individuals to do the best that they can do. So if you've got someone saying, actually, I'm really struggling, you've got a golden ticket to go, right, let's have this conversation. I've noted this. Mm-hmm. It's so worthwhile. But I think if other people are looking at it, they've got to know what they're looking for rather than just reading it and not taking it in, because then again it's a pointless exercise. But actually looking for clues. Are there common themes that are coming through? Is there common themes coming through across the team as a whole that might give you an idea of what's going on? It may be that they're absolutely smashing their targets. They're so highly performed, it's brilliant. Or it could be the opposite, of course.
Yes, yeah. And how do we measure performance? Are there different ways of measuring performance?
Yeah, there really are. We've obviously got the one-to-ones, which is a sit down face-to-face, usually or virtually, conversation of what's going on, where support may be needed, etc. We've got the individual objectives, but then also you've got 360 reviews. So this is where you may ask employees to select particular people around them, whether they're higher, lower, peer-to-peer, to give feedback on performance, their working, their relationships, etc. It could be that the organisation is mature enough to have those systems in place, so actually people are randomly selected. There's all these different things that can happen. A word of warning in terms of if the person is choosing individuals, make sure that they choose a fair measurement rather than just their mates. I think it's because you want to make sure, again, it's valid data that you're looking at rather than just really favourable, because highly unlikely people would choose someone that they didn't get on with. So there's all these different things, but there's also the team objectives, measuring those, bringing those in, as well as any projects that are being worked on. And one of the things that I've always found is how you measure it in terms of the scoring that you use. If you were to use rate someone's performance 1 out of 10, the chances are the majority of people are going to say 5 or above. They'll always go for the middle. So it's either positive or middle. You rarely get someone going lower. So be a bit sneaky and choose a 4. So they've got to make a choice of the person is either contributing, their performance is great, or it's not. Because otherwise, your data is going to just look that everyone's doing okay. And again, it's, as Christina said, it's telling that story. That's what you want to understand as a business.
Yeah, and also if you choose the middle, you're not really telling the individual, the employee, how they perform, because they're neither doing bad, they're neither doing good. So where do I stand? Do I need to improve? Do I need to carry on as I am? So I think, being more decisive, you're either good or you're bad, it helps both sides.
Yeah, definitely.
And with that in mind, thinking of the employee, what should the employee experience be when they go through a performance review?
Yeah, so this is so important. It just shouldn't be a surprise. It's simple things that if you're suddenly going to challenge them that their performance has been lacking over the past year, and this is the first time they hear of it, that's not fair. You should be having that conversation as soon as the performance starts to wobble. I've always thought it was really important to enable individuals time to really consider their objectives and actually be involved in them. It might be as a manager, you say, do you know what, these are the team objectives. This is the area I'd really like to focus on. Why don't you go away and have a think about your objectives? Now, it's going to be dependent on the business, on the role type that people have, as to even whether that's possible. But if it is, it's a really good way of people developing themselves and thinking, owning their objectives, because, well, they've set them. So I think they're really important. But being able to plan for the meeting, being an individual who's able to plan for the meeting before it happens. So bringing everything together rather than just sitting there going, I don't know why we're here. With the manager being fully prepared on, well, these are all the things I want you to talk about. Because, of course, it's the employees' meeting. It's to talk about their performance. So it's really important that they come prepared with what they're going to talk about. That being said, of course, that process is normally led by the manager. So it's got to fit into that communication dynamic.
Yes. And how do you feedback on performance?
So I'm sure majority of people have heard about the sandwich, the feedback sandwich.
Yeah.
This is the perfect way to feedback. I think you can do that. I think sometimes the message gets missed because nobody likes to give negative feedback or constructive feedback. We all want to tell people they're doing an amazing job. But sometimes it's really important to have that conversation. And if you wrap it up into a tiny little bundle and spend 20 minutes saying, Christina, you're absolutely amazing. You do such an amazing job. You could improve on this, but you're amazing. It's not going to come across. It's not fair to the individual. So think about some examples that you can give. Talk it through with the individual. The individual should always be aware of how they're performing. It's the decent thing to do, and it helps the team perform. because again, you're having that honest conversation, you're having that trust. You know, a couple of episodes ago, we talked about data culture and how that's all handled. This is the same. What we're saying to the businesses and the employees, we want to trust, we want to have the trust there, we want to have the confidence there. So actually, we're going to respect you and we're going to talk about these things.
Yes. And one question that I think it's on everybody's mind, certainly on the employees' and mind, is, does performance link to pay, or should it link to pay?
I mean, that's a good question. That's a good question. And I think it really depends on the business.
Because if you think about it, the expectations are, if I've done a good job, then I should get a pay rise, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's not always translates like that.
Unfortunately not. Unfortunately not. And of course, businesses are impacted by so many other factors than people just doing a good job. And it could be that, well, I think I do a cracking job, but maybe that doesn't show in any value of the business that comes in. Or maybe it's not measurable in that way. Or maybe the business has hit such turbulent times in the marketplace that it doesn't have that opportunity to say, actually, we're going to reward everyone by X amount or matching your performance to your pay. I think one of the challenges that we need to consider is going back to Cohen in terms of the rabbit and the dog and driving behaviour. Are we only driving behaviour for performance because people want that reward? Or are they doing it because actually they want to do it? They believe in what the company wants to do. Some organisations, it's about the reward. But for others, it's actually about the meaning of what they're trying to do and how to do it. So I'd be mindful of linking the two. But of course, in employees' minds, it's always linked.
Yes.
Definitely. So we've talked lots about performance reviews and the bit behind it, but what data should be held as part of a performance review?
So one of the things that I come across very often, and this is very important to understand, is whether the data contained in a performance review is personal data or not. So if you think about it, that data, that review, it's about the individual. It contains his or her thoughts or opinions about themselves, about their performance, but also the thoughts and opinions of the managers and potentially others, if it's a 360 review, for example. But it's about the individual, and therefore is personal data. And because of that, then the organization needs to consider the security measures that needs to be put in place around that, especially if they're using a system like an HR system of some kind, or if they are using more of a manual, paper-driven type of process. Think about the security of that paper. Using fireproof lockable cabinets and other security measures in terms of physical, like access to the building or the room of where the cabinet is stored, for example. But also who has access to that data. I think I've mentioned this in the past, in previous sessions, where the access to the data should be on a need to know basis. But that in itself is not enough. So you need to ensure that you have a process for granting the access that takes into consideration promotion. So someone that didn't have access before, because they've now been promoted to a manager, for example, they will need access to that. If you're using an HR system and you allow the employee to have access to its file, to their file, again, make sure that they can access only their file and not other people, which has happened in the past. Think of levers, which we tackled quite in depth in the last session. So remove the access when you have a lever. That it's really, really important. And the other thing to think about, again, you know, it's retention. You can't keep the data forever. That's the sort of the instruction from the GDPR. It doesn't really tell you how long you can keep it. It just simply says not to keep it any longer than you need it. So you need to come up with a justification of why you need to keep it for 3 years, 10 years, whatever that might be. The other things to take into consideration as part of a performance review in terms of the information held within the review, that they will also contain things like absences, including sickness, so that it's medical information. Sometimes also it's not just about them, but about a member of their family. So, for example, in the past, when I was a manager, I had a situation where a member of my team, her father, who was her only living parent, was going through some really aggressive cancer. So he was doing chemotherapy and radiotherapy. And so she was his only person that could take him to hospital and pick him up and take him there. So that meant that, her performance got impacted by that. So we, was documented in the review due to her, the situation of her father. So you're also collecting other people's information, although her father wasn't mentioned, but his condition was. So medical information is special category. So extra provision are required. So think of, again, security, how you're going to protect it, how you're going to process it, etc. So in a nutshell, performance review is personal data, and therefore the whole spectrum of the GDPR applies.
So there's an awful lot to think about there. And certainly, I mean, I've been in HR for, I think I was working it out the other day, for about 25 years now. So I remember it when it was completely paper-based. We're obviously now in a position where organisations are starting to implement systems, whether it's HR systems, information systems, or whether it's actually online performance reviews. Mm-hmm. So which is better, the paper-based or the online, do you think? What are your thoughts?
I think both of them have their strengths and weaknesses. So I don't, obviously we are moving as the entire business sector, we're moving more and more towards, electronic driven systems. It's always, obviously you've got to think about the green aspect of it. The paper side, obviously there's a lot of waste of paper and all of that. So the paper one, if it gets lost or destroyed, is lost forever. While instead, if you're using a system, a software system, then, hopefully you have backups so you can retrieve it if, for whatever reason, the system goes down. So you have a way of going back and sort of recuperating that data, and so carry on with the business as usual. Obviously we're talking about HR scenario here. But the data won't be lost. You can retrieve it. So I think perhaps, an HR system, you've got a lot more security as well in terms of, cybersecurity that you can apply, like multi-factor authentication, passwords. It helps you to ensure access is controlled better compared to the paper. So to me, having an HR system is a lot, is more efficient way of operating. You can also allow, for example, your employees to maintain their own data. What I mean by that is if they move house, they can they can go themselves into the system and update rather than you having to do it manually. So it just takes away an awful lot of other manual activities that are around it that are onerous to the business and to the employees, to be honest, or to the individual. So an HR system, it's perhaps the better way forward. It also allows you, for example, to download the report, the actual review, going back to our subject today, and then sort of either making it available to the employee so that they can go into the system and download it for themselves, or you can email it to them to their work email address, and so it stays within the secure environment of the organization. You can also void if they have access to the reports, to their reviews through the system. That also takes away the potential, the risk of them saving it to their local drive, or to take it away from the actual secure system of the organization and emailing it to themselves, to their personal email address, and that comes out of your secure environment. You then lose control of it, but then again, as the controller under the GDPR, you're still responsible for it. So you're reducing that risk of the data exiting your secure environment. If you can't do that, and in terms of your HR system doesn't allow for the employee to view their report directly into the system, but you have to download it and then email it to them, make sure that you're sending it with an encrypted email, password protect the document if possible. So those would be my advice. It's a bit of a minefield, but be aware of that whenever you can avoid or reduce the risk, you should be doing so. So you need to make precaution that there isn't a data leak, basically, that could then lead to a data breach. And if you are unfortunate enough to have a data breach, which mainly the main cause of data breach is actually is an interesting report that the ICO issued last year. The major cause of data breach is sending an email to the wrong email address. So if you are sending the report via email, make sure, even if it's the within the work email address, make sure you're sending it to the right Christina, to the right Julie, and not to another Julie or to another Christina, because that would be a data breach. And if that were to happen, do you have a data breach process? So when I go into organization and I look at their policies, they say that they do have a data breach process. Excellent. But when it comes to it, nobody knows what that process is. Nobody knows what to do if there were to be a data breach. So it's great to have a policy, but you also need to have the process that support that policy and enables that policy to be put in place, and so that the correct steps are followed when it comes to a data breach or any other process.
I'm not surprised by the findings of the ICO. That's certainly, I think, the most common data breach that I'm aware of. And I know we talked lots about what you do with the data and the needs for that security. Is there anything else that you would do with the data that we collate as part of performance reviews?
So obviously you've got to make sure that if you are using an HR system, you have backups, so that so make sure that when you are selecting your provider for your HR system do a due diligence on them, to make sure that as part of their services, they are providing you with backup. It should be done daily. What is the disaster recovery plan if the system were to go down? How quickly can they put it back in place? Encourage the employees again to access the report through the HR system. If possible, avoid them downloading it, saving it to their local drive, emailing it to themselves, so that it comes out of your control of your secure environment. And obviously make sure that whichever system you're using, or if you're carrying on with the paper, store it in a safe place. Make sure that it's secure. Only who needs to have access to it has access to it, etc. That is really, really important. And Julie, is there any other way or that the data is being used from an HR perspective?
Yeah, so one of the things that I would do in terms of reviewing the data is really look at the overall organisation and their performance. So you amalgamate all of the data and really slice and dice it to understand what's going on in the business. It tends to be quite a normal thing for organisations to look at doing a bell curve to understand performance. So what that means is essentially you should have 20% of your organisation that requires some improvement, 20% which are your superstars, and then everyone else in the middle. And what you can do with that data is then slice and dice it per department, per tier, per manager, depending on the size and complexity of your organisation. So you really can start to understand what's going on. Now, of course, with that, the slicing and dicing the data, the looking at the different departments, you can also start to think about demographics, diversity of your workforce. Are there patterns that actually could be seen in terms of the performance? Are people in Manchester performing better than those in London, for example? What about age ranges? Where does that sit in terms of performance? And actually, is that something that you need to consider? Are 20 to 30-year-olds not performing? Are there commonalities between other departments? Are there signs in the data that actually can really support your business? And whilst it is it's a thankless task doing all the data, and I say that hand on heart for having done it for a long time. When you get to the results, it's absolutely fascinating because you really start to see that story coming through in the data. And I think...
Sorry, go ahead, Julie.
I was just going to say, I think it's absolutely fascinating, and it really makes the reviews come alive and be valuable to the business. Now, of course, all of that data has to remain anonymous. So you're looking at the measurements rather than, and the locations, rather than Joe blogs this, that's their performance, etc. And of course, it should only be shared with the people that it needs to be shared with.
I'm glad you said that, because that's what I was going to say. I'm sure all of that data is anonymized in terms of to create the analysis. Yeah, okay. I'm glad you said that.
So when we're thinking about the data, and I think you covered the part of this earlier, how long should that data be retained for? And not just the performance reviews, but of course all the analysis behind it, the work that goes on behind it.
So, as I mentioned, the GDPR, doesn't tell you how long to keep it. It just simply says that you can't keep it forever. So you can only keep it for as long as necessary. But you need to define what that necessary is. So you need to, or you, meaning the business, needs to justify it. And then you need to have then a process in place that support that retention policy. So in other words, allows the execution of deleting the data at the appropriate time, when it's required. So as I said, so you need to establish what that necessity is, what that retention period is. For a lot of documentations, the rule of thumb is 6 years based on the Limitation Act. But it doesn't have to be. It can be longer, it can be less, so long as you can justify it. In terms of the analysis, which is anonymized data, well, you'll be pleased to hear that anonymized data is outside of the scope of GDPR because the individual is being stripped of every identifier, and therefore the individual behind that data cannot be identified. So anonymized data, you can keep it forever, but we need to be very, very careful of what anonymized data means, because I've come across documents that have been referred as anonymized when actually they weren't. So just removing the name of the individual is not enough. There has to be stripped of every identifier. So that could mean, for thinking of in an HR environment, that would mean their employee number. That would mean their address, their language, their gender, their ethnicity. So it's everything that could identify them needs to come out. So religion, for example, sexual orientation. So if you are doing an analysis, say, for example, on gender, whether you have a gender equality within your organization, you need to strip everything out of it, just keep male, female, if that makes sense.
Definitely. And I think it's quite a common trait for HR to assume that the data's been anonymized because they've removed the name. But
it's not enough.
You've got the ID in there.
Yes.
So I think that's a really, really valid point. And I appreciate that I asked this question, I think, in all of our LinkedIn lives. But I'm going to talk about subject access requests. Just because I feel we need to cover this in all that we do. But should the data of performance reviews be covered in subject access requests?
The simple answer is yes. So why is that? If you think of what we said earlier, that a performance review is personal data because it's about that employee, that individual. So if they're asking for a copy, of their data, then performance review is part of it. Because, as I said, it contains their thoughts, their opinions about their performance. Now, it also contains, as we said earlier, the opinions and thoughts of the managers and other individuals that have contributed about that individual. So what you need to do as part of a SAR, subject access request, is that performance review needs to be redacted of the of data that could identify other individuals, because again, as the business, as the controller, you are responsible for protecting other individuals. So if the review mentions that Joe Blogs says that Julie has done well, she's fantastic, blah blah, you need to remove the name of Joe Blogs, basically, to protect his identity. But the opinion of Joe Blogs about Julie, because it's about Julie and Julie is the requester, as to whom the data belongs to, or is about, you need to release it. Yeah, does that answer your question, Julie?
It does, and I think it drives home for me at the challenges that we always have facing SARS, and really considering of actually who that data belongs to.
Yes. So, I mean, so it's not necessarily about belonging, but it's about that individual. And a client of mine, well, somebody who's working as a client of mine, a friend of theirs, they have submitted a subject access request to their employer, and the employer has come back with a very legal letter, or legally sort of language letter, to say that basically they're not giving you anything. They've done all of the redaction, everything. They've not done it. They've simply not done it. They want to use the excuse. So, well, no, they can't refuse you, because a subject access request is an absolute right. So you are entitled to get copies of those requests. The only way that the organization can refuse is if they can prove that the request is excessive or manifestly unfounded. If they can't, then they have to give you the data. They have to redact it, but they have to give it to you. So, they're going to be reported to the ICO, I'm afraid, not by me, nothing to do with me. But this is, one of the ways on how organizations are being, naughty, and they shouldn't be doing it, because again, you are showing that you're not professional. You know what I mean? You are, we can trust you. So it's not really going to your benefit at all. You're much better working with that individual and say, is there something in particular that you're looking for to help us narrow down the effort, rather than send, a legalese letter that basically say we're not giving you anything, which is not true and is not fair either. Okay.
Definitely. So I was just thinking, whilst it's a shameless plug, I suppose it shows the importance of actually connecting with Christina in terms of really thinking about the data side, and subject access requests and the processes that you need to follow should you get one.
Yeah, it is a bit of a minefield. I understand what can and cannot be released, if you want. It's important. Yes,
definitely. So even when we're thinking about the data, and if we think about HR systems and capturing that information, are there any other considerations that we need to give of where that data is actually stored? Because we've got the difference between on-prem data, so on-premise, or in the joyful cloud where everyone looks up.
Yes. So in terms of where it's stored, especially if you're using an online system like an HR system, again, going back to what I said earlier, what I sort of said, you need to carry out a due diligence on the provider of the system. One of the key questions for you to ask and to understand is where geographically is the data stored, because by saying it's in the cloud, it can be anywhere, and it's basically someone else's server, because they could be, for example, transferring that data onward to another provider. So they might be providing you with the system, but not necessarily with the storage or the backup. That could be, they might have outsourced that to another provider like Google or AWS, which is Amazon Web Services. That's what it stands for, which basically is the cloud. Okay, so being in the cloud just simply means it is on somebody else's server. And the reason why you need to understand that is because if it is outside of the UK, if that storage is outside of the UK geographically, then you need to understand where else it is. If it's within a country that has an adequacy status, then you are okay. If it isn't, then you need to understand what safeguards need to be put in place. And these are legal safeguards. If it is in the US, which is very likely, then you need to understand and ask the provider to check that they are part of the data protection framework. If they are, great. So, for example, Google are, and Amazon, so you're okay with that. But for example, who was I checking the other day? Apple's, they're not. So if they are part of the data protection framework, then you can use what is called the UK-US data bridge to transfer data to and from the US as part of your cross-border transfer safeguard. But if they're not part of that data protection framework and they're in the US, or they're in a country that does not have an adequacy status, then you need to put in place what is called an IDTA, International Data Transfer Agreement. But before you can put the agreement in place, you need to perform a transfer risk assessment, which will then tell you the risk of transferring that data, whether it's low, high, medium, and low. And if it's low, you can go ahead with the transfer assessment, transfer agreement in place. If it's high or medium, there might be some additional security measures that you need to put in place to then lower the risk before you transfer. So it's quite a big exercise, not to be underestimated. It's quite important as well. So do your homework, do your due diligence, because again, as the controller, you are responsible for the end-to-end journey of the data that you are in control of. So you are responsible for the entire what do you call it? Vendor management. You're for the entire journey of your data, basically.
Yeah, I think from a HR perspective, or certainly from my own perspective, that when people say, "Oh, it's in the cloud," they automatically assume that the cloud is within the UK, and that can be such a dangerous assumption to be made. So definitely, really, really important to ask those questions and to look a bit further.
Yes, absolutely. And again, another common assumption that organizations make. I'm not sure why I'm no longer visible. Can you see me? I can't see me.
You've frozen.
Oh, but can you hear me though?
But we can hear you.
All right. Okay, that's all right. One of the common assumptions that businesses make is that our client, our storage is with Google, for example, but they're not checking where Google puts the data, because Google have multiple storage facilities, some of which are in the UK, some of which are in the US or other countries, but they're leaving it to Google to decide. So you need to be the one that says, well, actually, can you put in the UK storage? I think Amazon, they put it in the UK straight away, unless you tell them otherwise. So, but with Google, you have to tell them, otherwise it goes straight to the US. So they're like by default, it goes to the US. So you need to be aware of that rather than making the assumption.
Definitely. So look, potentially lots of actions coming out of this LinkedIn Live, which is absolutely fantastic. As we get closer to the hour, just to remind people, if they do want to ask any questions, please feel free to use the chat facilities. We will either answer your questions during our time or afterwards. I'm intrigued, Christine. I need to ask you this question.
Okay.
What's the worst process that you've come across in terms of performance appraisals?
For me, it's been when it's done once a year and is done as a tick box exercise. It basically brings no value to me as an employee. Also, because I've worked with large organizations, so we would work in a matrix leverage kind of structure. And so in order for my manager to assess my performance, they would need to gain feedback from other people that I've worked with, from a different department. And so I've seen where if I was the manager, where my employees would nominate their buddies, so they would get all, glorious feedback, which again is pointless. So I would then tend to select some myself for them. So yes, like I think you've tackled this before earlier, where you said, in order for the performance to be constructive, you need to nominate those individuals that will, not just your buddies, but those that will reflect your true performance, because otherwise you're not going to improve and develop either. So for me, that it's important. Before we go, there's something else that I really want to tackle, because as we were talking today, we mentioned and we referred back to some of our other sessions, like data culture, like the employee exit that we did last time. I also want to tackle the psychometric testing, because I am aware that some organizations use psychometric testing as part of performance reviews, and then it just gets stored and done nothing with it. And so I would be wary of, again, remember that psychometric testing is medical data. You can't force the individual to do it. It can only be voluntarily done. But then if they do volunteer to get it done, because there is value in a psychometric testing, make sure you use it, you make use of it. Otherwise, what's the point? Yeah. Use it for the improvement of the individual development with their participation. Don't just, send it out and say, you must do this, because it isn't a must, number one. And number two, then why are you doing it?
Yeah, it's such an important thing. And I think as so one part of the services that Apuri offer is DISC, which is looking at behaviours, as well as motivational maps, which really work to understand what motivates people. For me as a practitioner and accredited to facilitate those, I want organisations to be able to use them, develop them, implement them in everything that they're doing to get the true benefit. Otherwise, as Christine said, what's the point? What's the point in spending that money? There's no return on the investment. And actually for the employee, when you're considering their engagement, it's not going to be positive for them either, because they're being asked to do something that then nothing comes out of. So it feeds back into that data culture piece, and actually the business as a whole. So lots of, I think we've done lots of linking in of processes and organisational structures today as well, which has been really beneficial.
Yes, I think so. So sadly, I don't think, do we have any question, first of all?
Not as yet, but
No.
as I say, if people do have questions, feel free to contact Christina and I afterwards, or post them on the LinkedIn page, as we do really love to hear from everyone.
Yes. So sadly, we've come to the end of our time together today, but fear not, we have exciting news. Our next LinkedIn Live is scheduled for the 19th of June. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, the next topic is business continuity. The link for the next LinkedIn Live will be going out in the next few days. So keep an eye out there and make sure you sign up. We'd love to see you there. As Julie just mentioned, please reach out to us directly or through the post. If you have any questions or thoughts, we do welcome your feedback, because that also, as I said, inspires us for topics. If there is anything particular that you would like us to tackle, please let us know. And so thank you again, and it's been a pleasure to talking to you guys. See you next time. Bye.
Take care. Bye.